Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Logical, Plausible, Probable. I'm your host, John Maddox, and tonight we're having another stream you just won't want to miss. If you got what it takes, click that link. Well, prepare yourself, for this arena is not for the weak. Now, let the mental combat begin, but always make sure your arguments are LPP.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome to an impromptu after show here. I didn't even know that the Chris versus Snake debate was going on, but caught the tail end and was like, well, you know, people might need to be able to share their thoughts on this one. Let's do an after show real quick. So toss it together real quick at the end there, and here we are now. So thanks everybody for bouncing on over. What's up, Bubblegum Gun? Honesty Angels in the house. Andrew Kaufman, member. What's up, buddy? Thank you so much. Appreciate your support very much. Dustin Bucks here. We got Nori Davis. I think I saw Honesty Angel. Sunflowers here. Man, appreciate everybody for coming on over, and hopefully we'll have a good conversation about the debate. If anything interesting came up for those of you joining for the first time, obviously, it's an after show, at least initially, so we'll kind of stay focused on the debate. And if you want to join the stream, it's pinned in the side chat. What's up? Jamie Russell's here too, and the one and only Standing for Truth. What's going on, guys? So initially, we'll kind of do round robin stuff as people join the panel. We will discuss, best one-liners, comebacks, overall talking points, who won, lost, etc. And then we'll kind of go, if still going, I'll plan on keep this for like maybe an hour and a half, but we will go into general discussion about other stuff. New people come in, give them the floor, discuss what they thought about the debate, and then we can go back to the general conversation. Also, might be a little sidebar if this dude known as Mr. Hyde will show up. He's been talking mad trash and wants to have a go at me, so we'll see if he shows up. If you are here, Mr. Hyde, link is pinned in chat. You can just go ahead and join. But without further ado, we got Jungle Jargons backstage. What's up, Jungle? How you doing? Welcome to the stream. What are your thoughts? What do you think about tonight's debate?
Yeah, what's up? I'll just say it's no contest anymore. It's almost boring, but it's still interesting. You learn, pick up things here and there and stuff, but they have no position, no argument, no point to make. I mean, it's not even close.
Yeah, there really
About
is
it.
getting the level of desperation on some of these arguments is getting pretty obvious at this point. Like, so you're just going to keep clinging to this little sliver of a bone that you've extrapolated out to be this comprehensive organism that you can assert beyond doubt is a transitional form. Got it. Okay. Yep. No inference there whatsoever, and no naturalism of the gaps insertions to this evidence, interpretation of this evidence. Let's be very hyper confident, shall we say, in the validity of our talking points. But looks like House of Comments is in the house. You still are you still in Berlin, or have you made it back to the UK? George Bond, what's up, George? How you doing, brother? Says Mr. Epic again. It's cold and wet here, really cold and very wet. Is it monsoon season down there for you, George? I'm interested to know about that one. It's definitely getting interesting. Oh, what's up, Steve? What's up, Dustin? Welcome to stream. How you doing? Dustin, you there?
Can you hear me?
Yep. Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay. I'm not doing too bad. Yeah, I caught the debate. Snake seems to be, I don't know, man. I don't remember him actually bringing up any transitional fossils. Like, not really actually pointing to anything. Just a lot of pointless stabbing in the dark. That's all I basically saw.
Yeah, do you think that, like, I taught his piece where he was talking about like some lizard and if it can like keep he's like, it's a 3D printer, it can just keep printing this stuff, and I'm like, so you're using a living organism as proof of transitional fossils? Like, I'm not in fairness, I came in at the tail end of that, so he may have had a context that I missed. But when I heard him talking about that, I'm like, that doesn't really, you're talking about extant organisms substantiating your fossil record. That doesn't,
like I said, mostly all I heard was gibberish. I didn't hear any evidence. No position was really taken. He didn't provide any prediction. No testable model. Just blah, blah, blah. You should believe me because I have an opinion.
Yeah, well, there's some of that. Okay, oh man, we got two more folks. What's up, Bible Research Tools, aka Dan? How are you doing, brother? How's goes the recovery? Yep, you're coming through. How's the? I know you're on slow recovery, but how you doing? Are you making progress?
Yes, very much. Thank you.
Great, awesome. Glad to hear that. Did you catch the debate? If so, what'd you think about it?
Yes, it was pretty good, I thought. Are you talking to me?
Yeah, I'm talking to you.
Somebody mentioned transitionals a minute ago. I thought that was pretty lacking. Well, what do you think about this, or what do you think about that? I got a problem.
What's that?
I have a problem. It's feedback. What do I do about it?
You probably still have the YouTube tab open.
Oh, the YouTube. I remember now. Okay, let me close that.
Yeah, if you close that off, that should solve that feedback problem.
Is this better?
Yeah, we can hear you just fine. Are you still hearing the feedback, or is that cut off?
Yeah, it's gone. Thank you.
No problem.
You told me that once before, but I'm a slow learner.
Well, in fairness, you were probably doped up on a bunch of drugs while you were in ICU, and it's totally reasonable that you forgot that one.
Well, I still am. Lots of drugs. The only thing I took before all this happened was allopurinol. That's it. I had no other medications, period. And I'm in my 70s. But now I'm on, gosh, 8 or 10 different medications for heart and you name it. 5 of them make me drowsy every morning. So my mornings are pretty much shot. But no, I'm recovering real well. I'm getting around. I actually am able to take my tank and go to the supermarket as long as I don't do too much. It's just a little better now.
Well,
Well,
that's
actually,
good.
it's a lot better. But they said it'll take about a year to really get back on your feet, if you can. Now, some people can never recover because they lost too much lung capacity. I'm not sure if I'm in that category or not because I've been steadily improving. And when I first got home, I couldn't even go to the toilet without losing all my breath. I mean, I
wow.
just get, but now I don't even think about it. So that's a major, major improvement.
Well,
No, I'm doing much better anyway. Thank you.
I think that what you're going through, even in your 70s, is proof beyond all doubt that there is no designer. Because if there was a designer, your body would have recovered a lot faster. Or
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I thought about that.
It might not have ever even broken down at all if there actually was a designer. So I think that you are proof that evolution is true. There's no doubt about it.
Well, actually, I think I'm proof that Genesis is true. That
okay.
Man took a fall, and the whole world pays for it. And the only salvation is Jesus Christ.
Oh man, dang it! That sounds reasonable. Dang it, I totally forgot about that. All right, what's up, Donnie? How you doing? Welcome to the stream. I'm sure in tonight's debate you were struggling to control yourself to remain neutral. What'd you think about the debate tonight?
Well, unfortunately, I did fail, and in terms of usually I'm pretty good at keeping a straight face. I had a couple laughs during the debate, but overall, good debate. And yes, it's not always easy staying as neutral as possible as moderator when you do want to jump in. But it was fun, and the discussion was engaging. I'll say, before I go eat, and then I'm going to be joining after again for when the fun begins, the dumpster fire begins. So, John, it's coming. I'm going to share my screen for 2 minutes because I want to point out that this is why, when it comes to the transitional forms argument, and people know.
Okay, hang on. Before you go into this,
go ahead.
What have I been telling you for 2 years now?
Share screen or a full screen?
Yes, none of us can actually, when there's any words on there, nobody can read it. Okay, so 2 things. I'm going to give you live instruction again. Okay, there's a new tool in StreamYard that it allows you to you can take like a PDF version of your presentation. You click on the share button. You highlight the slides option, and then you can upload from your computer. And you can do a PDF. Then that presentation is in perpetuity available to you in StreamYard. And you can just click on it. Or if you want to upload a new one, you can delete that one, upload a new one. It's fine. But it allows you to go full screen while still being able to see your computer screen. I'm just saying.
Well,
just
John,
just do it.
John,
just do it.
John, you'd be very impressed with your boy then tonight. You'd be very proud of me, because when Christopher Sylvia started his presentation, he did what I usually do and kept it like this. And I said, Chris, wait a minute, brother. Hit that slideshow button, click, from current slide, and bam.
Okay,
so John loves it.
So you did do as I say, not as I do?
I saw your Slack text today, so I thought, all right, I'm going to make John proud.
Well,
but you weren't even watching. You're gonna have to go back and check out that.
Yeah, but now you're not. But now you're doing it. You just proved beyond all doubt that you operate from the do as I say, not as I do perspective. So, click on that presentation from current slide, brother. Go ahead. I yield.
That's how I grew up. My dad's favorite line was "Do as I say, not as I do." I personally like it this way only because I have like hundreds of slides, and I love being able to see where I'm at. But I hear you, brother. I hear you. I'm going to make you proud. There we go. Look how beautiful that looks. So, when it comes to the transitional forms argument, to me, and anyone that's seen my debates know I make this point, and I make this point in all my books too, is that it's a non-discriminatory line of evidence. And I find what it does is it takes the creationist down an unnecessary, I'm hearing some feedback, down an unnecessary rabbit trail. Okay. And what I mean by that is we should look to the discriminatory lines of evidence, the lines of evidence that can tell us what's true, separate ancestry or universal common ancestry. Okay. Because from the design perspective, human engineers actually design interesting quote unquote transitional forms. For example, this right here is a military amphibious assault vehicle. Okay, it's not a vehicle that's strictly built for the land. It's not a vehicle that's strictly built for the sea. It's actually built for the transitional environment from sea to land. Okay, and the evolutionists, they'll look to some interesting extinct creatures like Tiktaalik, Archaeopteryx, the synapsids, right? These mammal-like reptiles. They'll look to the so-called fish to amphibian series. And it's an unnecessary rabbit trail, because here's the thing. In the same way that we design interesting mosaics, okay, for example, the crossover SUVs, that's actually the perfect so-called transitional form. Neither an SUV, neither a van. It's perfect for those that don't want either of those vehicles. They want something in between, a crossover, right? So we make hard to classify vehicles, just like the hard to classify creatures in the biological world. Evolutionists can look to and say, hey, here's a transitional form. Like this creature, for example, the synapsids, look at these creatures. They blend the features of reptiles and mammals. So it's unnecessary for us as a creationist, because we can line things up all day and say, okay, here's the military amphibious assault vehicle. There's your transitional form. Now, we see interesting mosaics in the fossil record and extant, like the platypus. We design interesting mosaics. It's not a way to differentiate between the models, because to the evolutionist, Tiktaalik, Archaeopteryx, the synapsids, those are transitional forms. To the evolutionists, that's kind of what they're looking for, right? But to us, it's also expected. They're interesting mosaics. So I like to look to genetics. I like to look to, especially genetics. When it comes to the fossil record, here's the last thing I'll say. What we know today empirically is that mutation accumulation puts shelf lives on genomes. Therefore, their interpretation of, let's say, Tiktaalik or Archaeopteryx as being some transitional form over millions of years, they don't have millions of years, because mutation accumulation puts shelf lives on genomes. So in a nutshell, that's my take on transitional forms. I don't personally go down that route, because I think it's an unnecessary rabbit trail. I'd rather get right to the differentiating lines of evidence, which one way to do that is genetics. That's what's inherited, sperm and egg. So I yield. That's...
Well, you make all these superficial arguments and very non-substantive comparisons, because I'm sorry, but you have a category error, because none of those things you just use as evidence are self-replicating. So
they don't reproduce.
Yeah.
So all of your points have been defeated.
He's trying to trigger.
Andrew Cumming, is that you?
Yeah.
Listen, you've been defeated.
Nice.
Okay, so listen. There's this dude called Dr. Danny Boy who has done a 1 hour and 1 minute debunk of all of Donnie's talking points. Now, it's not until like the 31st minute of the hour where he actually says anything of remote substance. But you need to go check that out, because all of Donnie's talking points have just been obliterated. So just...
And John, it's so funny, because if you look at the ERV handbook, the last section of my non-discriminatory lines of evidence chapter, just because I anticipate what people like Dr. Dan are going to say, I've got a whole section on how, like, even in similarities between chimpanzees and humans, brother, you point it out all the time, we see massive differences in epigenetics, in gene expression, in alternative splicing, even in chromosomal architecture. And he addressed none of that in his review. Like, he just dodged, duck, dip, dive, and dodge all over the place. And then to what I just said here, nested hierarchies, transitional forms. Well, cars don't reproduce, right, John? It's so funny when the evolutionists say that. It's like adding reproduction adds more complexity. That's a bigger problem for the evolutionists. But yet they say it as if it's a good comeback, right?
Well, and what's so funny about that is the information necessity for self-replication has been recognized in cybernetics for like no less than 70 years. Like it's been known problem, right? Like, oh, the amount of information necessary for replication, self-replication is like massive, like exponentially greater than the information necessity for what is being copied, right? In order to, it's like, it just blows me away every time. It seems to just like go over the heads of the average Evo atheist. Like, I mean, people heard me rant about this over and over again, but like, hey, genius, I have a 3D printer that can 3D print an object. Is more information required for me to print the 3D printer that can print other objects? Like, hello, I have to have the information necessity for all the parts of the 3D printer that's going to print the object. So you have to have all the information for all of that, plus the information for the component that's going to be printed. This is very basic. This is not that complicated. Just use your brain, but they don't want to. Okay, before I rant on that, what's up, CJ the Synagogue? How you doing, man? Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you as well. Thanks for having me, and everyone else, of course.
Absolutely. So, did you see the debate, or jump in the after show?
I did, and it was, I think, a pretty good one. Sometimes these debates tend to be less than acceptable, to say the least. But Snake is not an idiot by any stretch, so it was at least pleasant to listen to. I had a little bit of a issue with, so like he brought up these two flat-headed fish. I can't remember what exactly the fish were, but he brought up these two flat-headed fish and asked Sylvius how we could distinguish between two separate kinds of flat-headed fish using only fossils alone. And to be honest, I think that's part of the problem is you can't. And one of the things I was saying in the live chat there is if you look at like a brachiocephalic animal, like a bulldog, for example, I think it would be really difficult to tell the difference between a fox, a bulldog, and a wolf, right? So the wolf and the bulldog are the exact same species, let alone same kind. And the fox and the wolf are not even in the same genera or genus, excuse me. Genera would be the plural, but at any rate. And if you didn't know what those animals were and had their three skulls, I don't know if you conclude that, right? In other words, I don't know if you could actually deduce, hey, the fox and wolf are not the same genus, and the bulldog and wolf are the same species using skulls alone. And then, interestingly enough, Stupid Horror Energy brought up in the live chat, I didn't even know this, but that we have, I guess, I don't know if this is true, I haven't verified it, but she was saying that we have a ear bone in the middle of our skull that's identical to a reptile's. And that to me like perfectly illustrated the point, because while certainly they would conclude that means that we're related, that's the claim that we're arguing about, right? So that would just be sort of begging the question. But what it definitely does demonstrate is when people say things like Pakicetus and modern blue whales, right, are in the same suborder or infraorder or whatever category they're actually in, or that these two different flat-headed species of fish are related in that kind of sense, right? In the sense that they're specially related. That you just can't demonstrate that using something like similar bones, because we're not even in the same class as reptiles, right? And yet apparently we have these similar bones. And so I wish that people would kind of give a little bit more, discussion, I guess, get a little bit more of their airtime to that in particular, because I wonder, maybe they have a good answer and I just don't know about it, but I wonder how a scientist using nothing but bones could conclude that these animals are the same and these animals are separate and these animals are split by such and such a family order and whatever. It just seems like it's kind of guessing, in my opinion. Like all you can say is they look similar, But if the same information that's telling you these two fish are related, or this Pakicetus is related to a blue whale, is also going to force you to conclude that me and a lizard are specially related when that's just demonstrably not true, then I don't see how that's a good line of argumentation. I hope that made sense.
No, I definitely follow what you're saying there, and I think in relation to your point about skulls and such, what drives me up the wall is, and this correlates with your point about like foxes, dogs, wolves, etc. Is if you look at like Vern Troyer, for those who don't know, he was the guy who played Mini-Me in Austin Powers, and Shaquille O'Neal, right? And let's say you don't know what they are, right? Let's just assume that you don't know what we're aliens. We come to Earth, and you discover all of these skeletal fossils of people like Vern Troyer, right? And then in this one little camp, and then a different dig somewhere else, everybody is as tall as Shaquille O'Neal, but you're the the alien scientist. If you believe in evolution, there is no way you're going to conclude that Vern Troyer, the Mini-Me's of the world, and the Shaquille O'Neals are all, you might say that they're like transitional forms of each other or whatever, potentially. But I just don't think it's remotely coherent to think that if just purely based on skeletal remains, you're going to be able to conclude that if everybody in this little camp that you find is, less than 3 feet tall, and then this camp, everybody's over 7 feet tall, the differentiation is so staggering. You're going to say they're related. You're not going to say they're both human. Even though we know from a real-time observation perspective, we do know they're both human, right? So to me, in your point also, the same thing, logic applies with the dogs, right? I've made the same argument many times, like, if you didn't know and you came across the skeleton of a Chihuahua, and then you came across the skeleton of a bulldog or a Great Dane or a Greyhound or something, right? They might say they're related, but the differentiation in the skeletons are so dramatic that you couldn't use it as proof. Like, come on, man. Seriously, let's look at this. If you don't have the real-time observation to make this determination, I challenge. I mean, it's like you guys you're dreaming if you think you're gonna be able to pull this off from Little Bones. I'm sorry, it's Fantasyland.
Yeah, and there's no way they'd include the exact same species. Like, I mean, the idea that a bulldog is actually Canis lupus would be astronomical, I think. And maybe I'm not a biologist. Maybe somebody could explain to me why it's not. But I think there's a real world example of exactly this, which is, I went to, just give some context, I went to South Dakota last year for the summer. Not the entire summer, but 2 weeks out of June. And there's a whole bunch of museums and stuff down there. They have a museum that lines up different hominid skulls. And by coincidence, they just so happen to have the Neanderthal skull right next to an Australian Aborigine. And I kid you not, and I'm not an anthropologist, of course, but I kid you not, I could distinguish more differences in the African skull and Caucasian skull than I could in the Neanderthal skull and the Aborigine skull. But they want us to believe that Neanderthal is something other than Homo sapien. And of course, we already know experientially that I and a black person are the same species, and that I and an Aborigine are the same species for that matter. But these skulls, they look identical. And imagine if you found like a Hun's skull where they like elongated their skulls on purpose so they look like aliens. And you're going to conclude that these guys are both Homo sapien. I don't think you would. The only reason you do now is because for a fact the Huns are human, for a fact the Aborigines are human, for a fact Africans and Europeans, etc. are human. But when they have an example of one who they don't know for a fact is human with these Neanderthals, then they immediately conclude, well, yeah, I mean, they're related, they're hominids, but not human. And that almost seems to amplify or exemplify, would be a better word, because it demonstrates it. Exactly what I'm talking about. And exactly what you're talking about as well. It just seems like a really poor methodology.
Yeah, there's a lot of desperation to prove their circular reasoning. And there's no ifs, ands, buts about that. Oh, sidebar before I forget. The other night, CJ audience, if you're unaware of this, the other night CJ had a good stream over on SFT about the inspiring philosophy, debunking of things. Anyway, by the way, sidebar. The reason I'm bringing that up, it was a good stream. You guys go check it out. The only thing I noticed was I think you were calling IP an old Earth creationist. He's not. He's actually a full-scale theistic evolutionist. Like, it's all built into the fine-tuning of the universe and all that kind of stuff. It's his current position.
Well, that is
not OEC.
Yeah, that's actually unfortunate because that, in my opinion, is far less scriptural than the OEC position. The OEC position is, I think, wrong, but at least it's not. I don't know how you can make sense of evolution from a biblical perspective, to be honest with you. I think if I came to believe evolution was true, I don't know that I could take the Bible seriously. You know what I mean? They just seem like mutually contradictory to each other. So, granted, he's not in that position, I guess, and so that's probably a good thing. It's better to believe in Christ than not to. But that is unfortunate to hear. I didn't know that.
Yeah, he's been pretty dogmatic about that. Before Christopher has joined us, one of the candidates or the participants, in tonight's debate. What's up, Chris? How you doing? Welcome to the stream. How'd you feel about the debate tonight? I'm sure it was a interesting experience for you dealing with the good old Snake was right.
Yeah, it was interesting. I lost the audio, and that means I had to switch to my phone, and then I didn't have my notes, so that didn't work out. But I think that we settled that in the discussion period. I thought it was pretty good. Other than that, I'll come better prepared next time with the notes.
I just realized I was on mute. Yeah, well, tech issues happen, and it's all about just rising to the occasion, right?
Yep, I tried. He may be a lot smarter than I am, but I am right, according to the Bible.
Well, you never have to. I'm all about some, humility and such. Well, sort of. But I don't think you should, downplay yourself. I think you did well, and to your point, when the evidence is in your favor and the truth is on your side, you don't need to have lack of confidence. You can be substantive and go in and win the day.
Yeah, the Bible is where I try to stand my ground, but I wanted to use science since it was scientific debate. I probably should have mentioned some Bible verses more than I did. I don't think I mentioned not one, but I'll pray about that later.
Well, I think that your desire to use more Bible verses is actually an underlying need to trigger atheists. I think that's actually the reason you want to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how it doesn't really matter whether it's, you quote scripture to them or make logical arguments or question, obliterate their own positions. Doesn't matter what it is. It's almost guaranteed that at some point atheist logic will break down and it'll turn into desperation, deflection, and attempts to prevaricate at from an ongoing perspective. And then if you go far enough, degenerate into full-scale anger and freak out, which Snake usually doesn't flip out, at least not until like 1 o'clock in the morning in an after show. In debates, he usually holds it all together, but it really is amazing how so many of them just at some point, usually like 30-40 minutes into a debate, they start melting down. It's pretty funny.
Yeah, I've never seen a Snake meltdown, but I'd like to see that.
Yes, Snake melted down. I think in 2020 he melted down a couple times in like 3 o'clock in the morning after shows, but debates, I don't think he's ever cracked too much. But I also think that Snake. I think that Snake also only has like one gear though. He's perpetually stuck in like second gear. Sorry, go ahead, CJ.
No, I was just gonna make a comment really quick about you have like a very vast vocabulary, and that like I don't even know what the word was you just used a couple minutes ago, but I feel like every time I watch your show, you use some, and I feel like I have a high vocabulary. So the fact that I feel like I'm always learning a new word on this show is just impressive. Anyways, sorry, I just wanted to mention that the first one I remember with this is scatology. When you said bovine scatology, I was like, the hell does that even mean? And I looked it up, and it's like, oh, I get it. That's actually really clever. You know what I mean?
Yeah, bovine scatology, ladies and gentlemen, is an epic way if you have a radio show that you'll be censored by, or potentially might get the station in like trouble and get fines and stuff from the FCC. Things you can say like, that is full scale bovine scatology, and you actually didn't swear. But if you think about this, bovine is cow, scatology is poop. Put them together, you both have the end outcome of BS as well as, an acronym, bovine scatology BS. It's a win-win proposition there. So I always I like that one. I can't claim responsibility for that one, but I learned that from a gentleman named Phil Valentine, who was a radio show host here in Nashville, and I met him several times. Got to go and smoke cigars with him and his brother at the Bourbon Street Blues and Boogie Bar in the Printers Alley in downtown Nashville a couple times, and went some political stuff around. But he actually he passed away in 2020. I think from remdesivir is what finally took him out, because he had this is before all the data started coming out of that, but he had kidney failure, and then he had liquid in his lungs. Then he ultimately died of pneumonia / liquid in the lungs. And he went into the hospital healthy, just had tested positive. He wasn't overweight, active man in his early 60s, and somehow magically was one of the people that died. But anyway, he has an epic song about why he wasn't going to take the jab. It was pretty epic. But anyway, yeah, he initiated the whole bovine scatology thing, and I always thought that was epic.
Yeah, for sure. That's easily one of my favorite things that people say online, for sure. Yeah. Anyways, that was just a little random tidbit I noticed. What was it? Prevaricate? Is that what you said?
Yeah, prevaricate.
Sure. What does that one mean?
It's just being an artful dodger in speech, right? So politicians are some of the most prolific prevaricators, right? They'll sit there and talk for 3 minutes and not actually say anything of substance, or not actually take a position. Well, I kind of sort of think that possibly we might be able to do this in a hypothetical scenario if there is nothing that stands in our way. Assuming none of that happens, then I definitely stand for this potentially. Like that would be massive levels of prevarication in actually taking a position. So you expect every debate you ever had with an atheist, you've experienced that, right? Like no 100% guaranteed. Well, what do you mean by evidence? I would say one of the.
What do you mean by function, John?
Right. So, okay. So I would say one of the greatest epitomes of prevarication would be Bill Clinton. What do you mean? What it depends on what the definition of is. I mean, like, you can't get more prevaricating than what does is mean? Like it's on a whole nother level. So,
well, John, let me ask you this. Creation myth. Speaking of Dodger and spending a lot of time saying nothing.
Sorry, real quick. Andrew Coffin says, "What is a question?" That's my favorite. That is epic. I'm gonna have to pull that one on atheist in a debate. That'd be funny. Sorry, go ahead, SFT.
No worries. Share my screen to see this comment. I want to see your thoughts on this because I got a kick out of this one. So, Dan, to his rebuttal on my chapter and on junk DNA, how I point out if the majority of the genome is junk, because I mean, Dan still believes, John, believe it or not, right, that the majority of the genome is still junk. Max 10%, he'll say maybe 15% functional, right? So I make the challenge several times in the book, and in my series there with Fuzz Rana, that if most of the genome really is junk, evolutionary leftovers, fossil viruses, so on and so forth, then there should be some type of mechanism in the genome that would suppress all of that junk, or else it would be really wasteful of energy and resources, right? So Dan's comment is this. I'm curious as to your thought. I thought you'd get a kick out of this. So he says sarcastically, "You think," to a quote that I have here. "Allow me to introduce you to my friend DNA methylation." So what are your thoughts on an evolutionist who were to say, well, the majority of the genome is junk, and in order to preserve energy and resources, in light of keeping all of this junk around, John, DNA methylation? What are your thoughts on that argument from Dan? John, did you step away, brother? Or are you on mute?
No, I'm here. I love to see how long it takes me to have a thought and then substantiate it on Google in a paper. And I think this took me about maybe 15 seconds. So let's think about this for a second, Danny boy. If you're talking about energy necessity, let's think about this, bro. Histones are going to cause the coils of the DNA and the packing, and you're claiming that because they're not being expressed, well, when they're compacted, that's not necessitating energy. Well, let's think about this, Danny boy, in relation to DNA replication. Okay, so it's there. What happens when it's being replicated? Let's just read for ourselves, ladies and gentlemen, directly from a paper here on, let's see, this is from the NIH National Library of Medicine, Genome Research, Chromatin Dynamics during DNA replication. When was this published? 2016, so it's relatively recent, so he should be aware of this. Okay, so, quote, during DNA replication, histone arrangement is perturbed, first to allow progression of DNA polymerase, and then during repackaging of the replicated DNA. To study how DNA replication influences the pattern of histone modification, we follow the cell cycle dynamics of 10 histone marks in budding yeast. We find that histones deposited on newly replicated DNA are modified at different rates. While some marks appear immediately upon replication, others increase with transcription-dependent delays. Notably, H3K9AC was deposited as a wave preceding the replication fork by 5-6 kilobases. This replication-guided H3K9AC was fully dependent on the ancyltransferase, blah, 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 which expression... Okay, let's get it. Well, keep reading that stuff forever. Okay, I'm pretty sure, dumbass, that equals the reality that those histones still get moved during replication, so there's energy, and then the marks get reinserted at different timelines post-replication. So that doesn't remove the energy required for replication, which from your evolutionary model would mean that there's an additional load that wouldn't mean you have optimal fitness. And then we do observe in real time that organisms, i.e. bacteria, will eject things they don't need usually. We see this all the time. So I'm not really following why you think from an evolutionary perspective, whether or not eukaryotes do this, or it's irrelevant to whether or not you like reasonably get to that point. I mean, I just don't follow. That makes sense? Everybody follow what I said there? Or am I out to lunch?
No, it makes a lot of sense. And I find it funny how, John, these evolutionists, right? They'll say through evolutionary mechanisms, natural selection, mutations, environment, so on and so forth, that over billions of years, you get a single-celled like ancestor into a whale, right? From single-celled like ancestor to multi-celled organism, fish, amphibian, reptile, mammal, man eventually. But yet the selection can't seem to figure out after millions of years how to remove so much genetic baggage from our genome. But we can go from a single-celled like ancestor to a whale. I mean, it's bizarre. And when it comes to like turning genes on and off and, controlling gene activation and gene silencing and pretty much just regulating every single aspect of the gene expression pathway. Okay. This is a good thing. If you had every single gene turned on at the same time, that wouldn't be good. That'd be immediate death. So you got to have some kind of control mechanism. And it's like these evolutionists like Dan just completely dodge the fact that, for one, this is evidence of forward thinking. Right. But two, how do evolutionary mechanisms even account for this? They see the short term. Natural selection sees the short term, not the long term. But yet we see control mechanisms in our genome that's telling, sequences when to be expressed, when to be turned off. All these different ERV sequences that are only functional during a restricted time and then turned off. John, you debated Erica, and she likes to say, and she said in your debate too, that, well, we can knock out these genes in mice and the mouse survives nicely. Like, it's so unsophisticated. There's so many genes that are only functional and active during, like I said, very restrictive times, including the many developmental stages and windows. When they're done doing their job, the many control mechanisms in the genome silence them, turn them off, right? They've done what they were created to do, designed to do. And so if you knock that out, let's say in the life of a mouse, just because the mouse survives doesn't mean that gene's not doing anything. It's just not active. It's done its job during or sometimes these genes will be repurposed, right? It's active in the embryo and then it's done its job and it's repurposed for certain environmental conditions, stressors. Maybe it'll be turned on at some point again for another function, but just all these things that they just completely avoid. I mean, this is a PhD, John, and this is his best answer to, why these mechanisms haven't suppressed because the genome is not junk. That's the whole point. They don't have an answer. Go ahead. I said a lot there.
Well, no, I agree with what you're saying. I just I couldn't help myself. I had to look and see if there was further substantiation of my previous position of his stupidity and staggering ignorance as a teacher or professor at a school. Okay, so let's go back to that whole, do we need those histones? Do they have to be copied and such? Let's see. Where did that piece go? Well, dang it. Maybe I found the wrong spot here. Let me go back here. Okay, so okay, I was just there. Hang on. Where the heck did this go? Well, dang it. There we go. Okay. During S phase, histones are transcribed and synthesized, DNA is replicated, and new and recycled nucleosomes assembled to form nascent chromatin. I mean, so these histones and the DNA that they're coiling is not having to necessitate energy expenditure in order to be replicated because they're wrapped up in histones. I mean that it really is beginning to fascinate me, the level of staggering incongruity with basic common sense and just general critical thinking that so many Evo atheists have. It amazes me.
Oh, why does it seem to be that the only people that attack creationists are the people that don't know any better? It's like most of these, scientists and everything, biologists, they seem to know better than to try to defend their position with creationists. But it's the people that don't know better that try to attack creationists and defend their position. Is that my imagination, or what do you think?
No, that's a good point. And that's a good observation. They're like, for example, Dan, being a virologist, in my opinion, was clearly not even aware of, or else he wouldn't repeat. Like these evolutionists repeat these same arguments, and their main argument is, well, okay, fine, ERVs are functional, but why do they resemble genetic material? And in the book specifically, but even in debates and whatnot, I provide numerous technical papers from 2022. Okay, that shows the ability of these ERV sequences to fight off exogenous retroviruses, and they do this through a number of mechanisms. But one mechanism is through viral mimicry, and in order for them to carry out their job and role, they have to have these similarities to exogenous retroviruses to do it, right? And that is a direct answer to why they look a lot like exogenous retroviruses, right? They got the GAG, the POL, the ENV genes, and the LTRs. So Dan's rebuttal, and he just dodged everything, but his rebuttal and his review, John, if you saw it, he just dodged it all. And he said, well, these function, standing for truth, he harps a lot on this antiviral protective abilities of these ERV sequences. And then he pretty much, in a nutshell, just said, they're expected because we see exogenous retroviruses like HIV, they'll get into a cell, and when they're in the cell enough, they'll kind of block it off, block entry from any other HIV viruses from getting in. And he said, so, it'd be expected that the ERV sequences would also fight off viruses for the host. And yet, if you look at the very papers cited, what do they say? So Dan says it's expected. What do these say? Recent studies also point towards an until now unexpected role, never predicted, never expected, of the immune system for the control of these elements, even those that do not contain fully infectious copies. I mean, here's just one more. Unbiased analyses of these genomic maps have uncovered endogenous retroviruses as what? What does it say? Does that say expected or unexpected?
No idea. No idea, because you're not in full screen mode, bro. And that's some small print. Full
you
screen.
Need glasses like me. You need here. Oh yeah, that does look better. I'll give you that.
You can still barely read it. What are you talking about? Like,
you may have won this war, John.
I mean, okay. Listen, listen. I'm on my laptop. I just went full screen on my laptop, and now I can read this. But let's think about this. If most people are on mobile, even full screen on mobile, you're not gonna be able to read that. So, but continue. Good.
Well, John, look at this. What year is this? Whoops. What year is this specific paper?
2022.
2022. And what does it say about these roles? Unexpected. 2022,
yep.
Unexpected.
Yep, unbiased analysis of these genomic maps have uncovered endogenous retroviruses as an unexpected ally in the regulation of the human immune system.
But what does speed is found?
Actually, the next sentence actually pretty good. Despite their parasitic origins, studies are finding an increased number of examples of retroviral sequences that have been co-opted for beneficial immune function and regulation by the host cell.
Isn't that amazing? Just straight up evolutionary bias and evolutionary assumptions just integrated into the papers. Despite their parasitic origins, even though that's the question, right? Is that really their origins? And they just toss that in there, co-opted for beneficial immune function and regulation. So they're admitting it's unexpected, but then they say co-opted, but with no evidence for this co-option. It's because go ahead.
No. I just fixed my connection. It's a little bit better now, so I'm just trying to contribute.
No worries, brother. You're good.
Well, yeah, to your point, the preceding assumptions is off the charts at this point. And Danny Boy did this in his review, right? He's like, well, we know that they're, retroviral elements. Like, we know they were inserted into the genome. Like, we know this. So, Donnie's just wrong. It's like, you don't actually know this. You have inferred this. You have made the assumption that this is so, based on your interpretation of the evidence. But you don't know this. You haven't proven this beyond all doubt that this is the case. And there's massive amounts of assumption. Like, the whole point of like, well, and not only is there the location, there's also the sequence mutation. Right. Like, so we know this. We know that this is what it is. It's like, no, your interpretation based on the foundational assumptions you make for your model says this. Like, if the points that you're making are correct, then your model implodes. So, and you're incorrectly. I mean, I can interpret data all sorts of ways. I mean, we know this. This is like a known thing. Like, you can interpret all sorts of different, or coming to all sorts of different conclusions based on your preceding interpretation models. Anyway, that stuff gets me up every time.
Well,
but one of the things you talk about all the time on a regular basis is the the overall functionality of the genome. And at the end of the day, for me, like, okay, so if the vast majority of the genome ends up actually having function, then these little minuscule spots that you're referring to don't really, and I'm talking about from a comparison to the overall genome, is minuscule little pieces of evidence, right? That actually would not have the substance that you talk about, i.e., like STRs, for example, make up what, 3% of the genome, I think, and they are considered, up until recently, have been considered, dogmatically argued as, completely junk regions, no function whatsoever, blah 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 blah. And we're now discovering that STRs have massive function, and the significance of the number of diseases that are caused by slight modification to STRs is becoming more and more understood. So let's just assume that short tandem repeats have function. That's another 3% of the genome that is significance to your overall fitness. I think we might be getting real close to that 10% number that you guys say is your failure point. And
how could you say 10% with a straight face? Like, isn't that mind-boggling? 10% functional. In light of all these studies we talk about.
Well, what cracks me up about this, just from like a basic logic perspective, right? So if per the EVOs, the totality of the genome is no greater than like 850 megabytes of data, and of the 850 megabytes, no more than about 3% is actually doing anything of substance. It's like, so you're going to tell me that the most badass robot to ever exist could possibly operate on less than like 50 megabytes of data? Yeah, you keep telling yourself that, buddy. Why don't you go talk to the guys at Boston Dynamics who are creating all the robots that like can dance and stuff? It's like, how much data is necessary just for like it to move its freaking finger, let alone like dance in synchronicity with another robot to music? I can only imagine the number of gigabytes that's necessary for that level of precision and function. Like, it's got to be off the charts, right? When you think about all the different parts that are necessary for that system to operate, and all the information for all the parts that make up the component, or make up all the components that are used in synchronicity, run by the operating system to execute those functions, right? It's probably terabytes of data, to be honest, but let's just say it's multiple, a couple hundred gigabytes. You think the human body has less overall functionality than like a human created robot? Like, get out of town, man. You guys have lost your damn mind. And if you think you pull it off in less than a gigabyte of data, you're nuts. I mean, I'm sorry, you're crazy. It's fantasy.
I mean, like what you're saying, just think of the developmental windows in general, embryonic development, the complex sequence of events, and all of these various developmental windows that literally changes a single-celled egg into a complex organism with hundreds of different cell types in different organs. And guess what? All of these being in the right place, and all of this programming, right, existing in the genome, which they now know mostly existing in what they thought was junk. Okay, just development exceeds 10%. But they want to fit everything, right? Even, the mutational buffer zones in our just everything. They just want to fit it in 10%. It's pseudoscience. What they're putting forth is pseudoscience. And that goes, which you were saying, John, to the shared mutations in the ERV elements that apparently form nested hierarchies, right? Firstly, anytime I hear personally shared mutations, quote unquote mutations that form hierarchies across different species, I automatically need to ask, is this really a mutation? This could be a created difference, because we know it's the evolutionist that explains every SNP, every DNA difference is a mutation, when in fact we understand that that's not the case, right? The majority of DNA differences are actually functional, non-disease causing, and probably designed. But nonetheless, even for sake of argument, let's say they're all mutations. Well, I was sharing screen earlier, and I cite, I think, at least 6 papers on how unexpected, again, John, as you know, the fact that a lot of these mutations are non-random. And there's certain parts of the genome that have faster mutation rates and certain hotspots, right? But Dan says it's probabilistic rather than deterministic. But again, what we're seeing is another argument based on the assumption that the majority of the genome is junk. Because if the majority of the genome is necessary to sustain healthy life processes in the cell, the majority of the genome is junk or functional, then John, correct me if I'm wrong, we're going to have more mutational hotspots. Because if the majority of, like, say, the chimp genome is functional and the majority of the human genome is functional, and let's say these genetic sequences like the ERV elements that, let's say, function in embryological development or determining cell types, they're going to be susceptible then to the same mutations as, let's say, the chimpanzee, who has the same ERV elements for that function. And it's just like a vehicle. They hate when we talk about vehicles, but Google what parts of a vehicle are the most susceptible to rust. They'll say, like the back of the car, like the trunk or the engine, for example. And Dan tried to say, this is contradictory to SFT's argument that the majority of these ERV sequences are essential, because if an essential ERV element gets hit by a mutation, then apparently the organism dies. But again, that's assuming that every single mutation is detrimental enough to kill the organism. An engine accumulates a lot of rust marks before the car dies. A lot of mutations are just nearly neutral. Go ahead, John.
Now, in fairness to Danny Boy, he stated that I think it was like only 144 of the 200,000+ ERVs have been shown to have function.
Right. Yeah.
Well, here's my response to that. You guys have been claiming that all these different portions of the genome don't have any function at all. And then you keep getting debunked on that. And then whole new types of portions of the genome that you guys claimed had zero function have been shown to have function. And let's think about this. There's all sorts of genes that we don't know what their function is. So you're telling me we haven't had enough time to figure out and identify all the functions of all the genes that we know do something. We just don't know what yet. And you're going to sit here and tell me that because we've just now started to even look for functions of ERVs, and we've only so far identified 140 of them for whatever the number was.
But even that's wrong. He's wrong on that. It's way more than that.
Well, I'm saying, my point is that even if that is all they found so far,
right? Yeah, for sake of argument,
that's irrelevant because we don't know what all the genes do. Yet nobody's going to run around and claim like, well, they don't do anything because we haven't proven 100% what it does.
Right.
We know that these other genes do something. We don't know what these do, so they don't do anything. Like, that's what you're arguing. Like, I don't know what size bolt would fit this nut. Therefore, it's not a nut until I find the bolt that it fits it. I mean, this is the kind of crap that we're talking about here. Like the complete, like the big picture thinking that just has evaporated in relation to the evolutionary arguments, right? Or the Evo Devos, right? Like, I don't know what it does, therefore it does nothing. That's what you're arguing.
I think if you apply this to like the study of neurobiology, you use that same logic, we'd basically be brain dead because, all these neurons and stuff, we don't know what they do. Well, then they must not have any purpose at all.
Listen, it's only chemical reactions, okay? Those portions of the genome that we call junk and the ENCODE guys that are functional, there's just biochemical activity, okay? So we don't actually...
It's just spurious.
it doesn't do anything because we haven't identified what it does or doesn't do yet. But it doesn't do anything because we don't know what it does yet. I mean, to your point, Chris, in relation to the brain, it's like, oh, I see these chemical actions happening as neurons are firing. I don't know what they do. Therefore, they don't actually do anything. It's just neurons firing. Like, have you thought that one through, buddy? Like and this goes back to the point that like sound of the folks have made in relation to the actual like hardcore research field. Evo Devos don't really get much of a seat at the table, right? Because it's like you guys are not thinking, like your worldview is dumb, and you're blocking actual realistic expectation.
Restricting their
you're restricting your mind by default in terms of reverse engineering. Like what we're doing, and let's just be honest, folks. What is happening in modern day research at the real levels, like in oncology and that stuff, is reverse engineering. That's what reverse engineering principles are what's having to be applied. And how did this magically happen by accident is not part of reverse engineering. I mean, it's like you're fired. You think this happened by accident? You're fired. You're fired. No, you're fired. And if it's Iran trying to reverse engineer a drone, oh, you're dead. You're dead for that one. Sorry. You think it happened by accident? You're fired. And I mean, by fired, I mean you're shot in the face. I mean, that's where we're at this point. And I mean, I can't take it seriously.
Well, and let me say this, especially when they say things like, well, it's only 114 that are functional. It's like, and I point this out in the book, the majority of what we're looking at in terms of ERV-like sequences are not elements that consist of LTRs, GAG, POL, ENV. They're just solo LTRs. And we know that these LTRs are just functional stretches of DNA. So they'll try and say, oh, it's just 114. It's like, well, what about the thousands and thousands of, quote unquote, solo LTRs, which I would just say are functional stretches of DNA that may or may not have anything to do with an ERV sequence. They're functional. Oh, and those thousands are shared with the chimp. Yeah. And they're functional. They're there for a purpose. They're not junk. And there's paper after paper documenting that. And, I'm just going through my chapter right here. And, I could show 10 papers right now that don't just say it's one or two that are functional. They say widespread functionality. Does widespread sound like one or two? Or prolific source of tightly regulated genomic elements, functioning in XYZ. No. And here's the thing. They never predicted any function. So like you were saying, John, even if it was 114, listen, there's so little we know. In these papers here in 2022 that talk about how the ERV sequences function in the immune system, it talks about how, that they're just in the beginning stages of understanding how these ERV sequences function in the immune system, and that there's increasing transposable elements being discovered to have function. I mean, that's why we intelligent design advocates have no problem saying, yeah. And as time goes on, we'll find more, right? But the evolutionists, they're kind of silent on it because egg on their face, right? They don't want more egg on their face. So they're just silent about it. They're not going to make any predictions. I think it was Dan, brother. That was actually, I think it was Dustin earlier that was saying, no model, no testable predictions. And that's pretty much what we're seeing. A lot of pseudoscience. Anyways, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say too, I mean, the fact that they're identifying distal gene regulatory function from ERVs, it's like, okay. So back to my earlier point about not actually having the time to actually do the research on functionality. If we have identified that they have that those different ones that have distal, which means from a distance, folks, right? Or situate. I'll actually read the definition. Let me Google this real quick. Okay, so in anatomy, distal means situated away from the center of the body or from the point of attachment. Okay, so if you have distal regulatory function of an ERV on a gene, that means it doesn't have to be right next to the freaking gene that it's regulating.
Right.
And if we haven't been, and if ERVs actually make up a big portion of the genome, a big chunk, right? Then we don't actually know what they might be regulating that is not next to them. And as we are now beginning to investigate more and more into like inter and intra chromosomal gene regulation, right, from the 3D folding and everything, who wants to gamble with me that we are going to discover that there's an ERV, there's a regulatory function from a inter-chromosomal gene regulatory perspective? I'm just going to go ahead and gamble and say that there's the likelihood that will be discovered. If it hasn't already been discovered, that will be discovered at some point. And then what do you do then? Then what do you do then? Hey,
Well,
dude,
it's expected, John.
it was unexpected. Now it's expected. So
unexpected until a creationist debates you on it.
It
You
was
only got a same face.
Listen, I expected to be unexpectedly expecting you're trying to use this unexpected component as an argument. So I already anticipated your unexpected response. So what's up? We already knew. Good.
Well, I was going to say, and you know, Dan tries to say, well, you're misrepresenting what I mean by unexpected. They were unexpected, but once we found that which was unexpected, we realized it's expected.
Once I found out that this unexpected, I expected this unexpected bovine scatology to come from you, then I expected your response. So I already beat your bovine scatology ahead of schedule. What's up? Okay, so we've been rambling. So CJ, Dan, or Chris, you guys, or Jungle, you got anything you guys want to add to the
well,
back and forth you're doing?
If it's not doing anything, it has no function, then why don't they just cut it out? I mean,
yeah, that's a good point, Jungle. We should challenge all evolutionists right now. Dr. Dan Stern Cardinal, we challenge you to knock out 90% of your genome and then tell us how you feel after that.
Yeah, okay,
and most of it, a lot of it was in the process of growing up anyways to begin with. You know, it's no longer used, but it was used throughout your whole, formative years and everything,
Jungle, that is genius. I have to say this. We have to make a meme. You know how Kent Hovind is famous for saying, if you think your coccyx or tailbone is vestigial, I'll pay you to have it removed, right? We should do the same thing, but on junk DNA. If you think the majority of the genome's junk, we will pay to have you knock out 90% of your genome, and let's see how you feel after that. That's gold, jungle jargon.
You know what I think needs to be done? I may have to do this. I think that there should be we should put together a fund for prediction gambling and just be like, here's the deal, Evos. We're going to go ahead and gamble X on the reasonable the timeline for discovery of different functions for different types of things that they claim are junk, right? And like percentages that will be discovered to have functionality, all that kind of stuff, right? And do this on like a 15-year gamble and be like, listen, what kind of odds do you jackasses want? Because you're hyper confident, right? So why don't we do, like 5 to 1, 10 to 1, 100 to 1 odds on, what the functionality is going to turn out to be? You put up your money, we'll put it in escrow. Here we go. And then we'll see who wins in like 15 years. Well, put the money up. Let's see what happens. I'm just going to go out on a limb that either they won't back up their BS or we'll get rich. So I mean, because I love the pi RNAs, for example. I remember watching the lecture from the head of Stanford's genetics department, and he's like going on this whole this whole lecture of like the things they discovered about pi RNAs, right, and their function and all this kind of stuff. And he's like starts off the whole deal with like, so up until now, basically, we thought these didn't do anything, or if they didn't have any function, it was 100% restricted to the testes and the ovaries. Yeah, it turns out that we're totally wrong on that, and the regulatory function of this is like a whole new doorway's been opened, and we're just now beginning to scratch the surface of what these things do. But oh, by the way, there's like 3 million of them, so we don't know what they do yet, but they definitely do some really important stuff. Then he goes into like crazy detail about it, right? And it's like, so I remember when I brought that up to, I think, Danny Boy, a couple other folks, they're like, That's a really small portion of the genome. But it's super important. So you guys are claiming that massive swaths of the genome don't do anything. But we know that this little minuscule fraction of it that you claim didn't do anything does like super duper important stuff that influences huge portions of it. So let's just play out that logic and be like, what if there's a whole boatload of other little tiny portions that you think don't do anything because they're, nothing, or you can't, like, it's not like slapping you in the face with like, I do a super duper important thing here. It's really obvious for anybody to see, right? And by the way, folks, if you're wondering, I'm waving my hands. I'm slapping people in the face with this right now. Because it's like a microRNA or a piRNA, it's, this little tiny, folks, out of 3.2 billion, or around 3.2, 3.3, whichever number is, billion base pairs, right? If you have a sequence that's like, 21 to 30 base pairs long, but it does like something super duper important, it might be kind of hard to figure out what that little dinky 20 base pairs out of 3 billion, it might be kind of hard for you to figure out what that does, especially if the regulatory, the function is dependent on like real-time environmental factors, which determine whether or not it's activated or not. Like, oh, it only turns on in this specific instance at this temperature in this stress environment. And if it's not that, then it never's on. Oh, and it also only turns on when you're 2. And then it never turns on again after you're, 2.1 years old. Like, let's think about this for a second, folks. And you were kind of alluding to that earlier, Donnie, on the time factor. And Jungle was mentioning that too.
Well, I wanted to say this too. And George Bond says in the chat, firstly, that he'll put $100 to that. So that sounds like a good challenge. I'm looking forward to that. So just listen to this one excerpt, okay, from a paper titled "Jumping Retroviruses Nudge TADs Apart." And I've actually got this on page 96 of the ERV book. So it says, it sounds like something right out of an intelligent design paper article. Far from being junk DNA. Well, right off the bat, does that sound like it's just 1 or 2 that are functional? They're admitting far from being junk DNA. The pervasive retrotransposons that populate the genome have a what? Have a powerful capacity to influence genes and chromatin. A new study demonstrates how the transcription of one such element, HERV-H, can modify, notice this, can modify the higher order 3D structure of chromatin during early primate development. Does that sound like something that's just been co-opted? Engine of evolution? No. So we just this one small excerpt from this paper is admitting that what we're looking at is that which is far from junk DNA. And they're doing things that in a way are irreducibly complex. They admit in these papers that if we didn't have certain retrotransposons, we wouldn't exist. Like, and I'm not even exaggerating. Like in my debate with Snake, I screen shared a paper. They literally say that without they'll say without the co-option, of course, evolutionary lingo, without the co-option of this specific class of retrotransposon, mammals wouldn't exist. Humans wouldn't exist. Wow. That sounds like it's needed. I'm glad I have that retrotransposon. I don't know about you, John, but I'm glad it's there. I like existing, don't you, brother?
Well, let's see. Quote, influence of ERVs on gene expression. 1, ERVs function as cis or distal regulatory sequences. 2, ERV proteins may regulate the expression of host genes in trans. 3, ERV RNAs can work as link RNAs to regulate the expression of the host genes. 4, ERV proteins may inhibit viral replication. 5, epigenetic modifications that silence ERV expression can influence the expression of neighboring genes. Sounds like they do nothing.
Co-option expected. This is the level of sophistication we're getting from their best. Everyone's waiting for this big review from Dr. Dan Stern-Cardinal. He spends the first 30 minutes, complaining about format, and the last 30 minutes dodging, saying things like these functions are expected, and saying that, not all mutations are non-random. Well, here's the thing. If the majority of the genome is functional and the majority of mutations are nearly neutral, then yes, these essential genes and sequences and elements can accumulate nearly neutral mutation. Doesn't mean the second they're hit with a mutation, the organism dies. No, they build up. They build
Well,
up in similar spots. Go ahead, John.
In defense of Danny Boy's review, I mean, he did accuse you of going off on rambles and, verbal, what was the term he used? It's too late. I forget the term. But anyway, what cracked me up about that, like, well, he went off on this other topic and, was discussing other things and then finally came back to it, 3 chapters later, finally came back to the main topic. And I'm like, dude, have you never read a freaking Richard Dawkins book? I mean, good Lord, bro. The amount of like cerebral download of things that have like no real, it's like, oh, okay, cool. So after that, 100 pages of anger dispersion from Dawkins, we're finally back to a little snippet of, fantasy in relation to, selfish genes. I mean, it's just, I like, have you ever read The God Delusion from Richard Dawkins? I mean, good night. I sat there, listen, I got that as an audiobook and I had it on like speed at like 2.5 and it was slow. I mean, I almost fell asleep.
Oh man.
I almost fell asleep at that speed, man. It's like, oh, good gravy. Can we get something? Oh my goodness. It's so bad. And yeah, so that his hatred of your slightly, going back to, well, the other part that amazes me about that is it's quite a few of the points you were making in those, oh, he goes off course. It's like he's substantiating the overall context of the arguments that are made in favor of your little favorite talking point, Danny Boy, of ERVs, and how this is another example of the manipulation and the filtered interpretation of the data, like all these other things that have been continued to be shown to be false about your worldview. And then now let's get back to how this is yet another example of this. And I mean, what amazes me about that, it's like you kind of do that usually. It's called context, dude, and substantiation of an overall point. And I don't know.
Well,
I didn't get his diatribe about that too much.
Well, and here's the thing, Dan, what he thinks is irrelevant is that which destroys his position. So he thinks the function is irrelevant, right? But the fact is it hurts him. Every single paper that he sees cited with excerpts from secular evolutionists demolishing without even realizing it, right? Irvs as evidence for common descent, it hurts. And I understand. And so to him, he has to say, well, this is irrelevant. It's not about the function. It's about the shared mutations. I mean, what a dodge that is. They can't account for the function. And you're right, John, context. An entire chapter devoted to design diversity, showing why the majority of the genome is not reflection of mutations over time and evolutionary leftovers, but actually of design, right? What do we talk about all the time, John? The front loading of genetic diversity, these functional DNA elements like the ERVs, the ALU sequences. So to show that the majority of the genome is functional is to show that which constitutes the genome exists within the functional genome, like ERV sequences, ALU sequences. It is to direct, if you refute, tell me if this makes sense, John. If you actually completely decimate junk DNA, the junk DNA paradigm, you also decimate everything within it. Pseudogenes, ERV sequences, ALU sequences. It's not irrelevant, but it is irrelevant to the evolutionists because their worldview is being demolished. Does that make sense, brother?
Oh yeah, I mean, 100%. It's yes. The level of desperation for the Evo atheist worldview is becoming clearer and clearer by the day, right? Of I'm going to desperately cling to the ever fragmenting little strings that I've been holding on to. And I'm going to project the fact that my worldview is imploding and start accusing you of God of the gaps, cognitive dissonance, when their naturalism of the gaps is just imploding in terms of, actual plausibility. It's happening before their very eyes. And For a lot of these folks, people heard me talk about this, so many of the quote unquote experts, if you're an evobiologist and evolutionary biology is false, you have spent however many years you being an evolutionary biologist wasting your time. You have literally been wasting your life. I think that might impact your ego slightly. And you're now going to be forced to admit you've been wrong this whole time while dogmatically telling everybody else that they're wrong and just don't understand it because they're laymen. I mean, really? That's a gigantic crow that must be ingested at that point. I mean, it's monumental, the level of ego that would have to be crushed to admit that. And let's just be honest, that's very, very hard for humans to do, even if it's not something that is your literal profession, right? Like just basic stuff, people have a hard time swallowing their pride. You really think that they're going to do that when it's their profession? Come on, man. That's fantasy land, if you ask me.
Yeah, and it is kind of a pattern too that's been around for a while of like just finding things to be redundant or irrelevant, not because they actually are redundant to the conversation, but because they're redundant, or not because they render your views redundant. Right? I can't remember the guy's name. I think it was Bob Einert, or however you actually say his last name, but nonetheless, he was speaking with Lawrence Krauss once. And he's bringing up all these different, because he's got this radio show. I believe it's Bob Iyer, but regardless, he's got this radio show and he's talking about creation, evolution, and all that. He's got Lawrence Krauss on, and he starts bringing up all these different examples of what could only be described from the evolutionist perspective as anomalies, right? And he bringing up some of the stuff that Kent Hovind would bring up, like such as the fact that we have, incredibly similar eyes to octopi and stuff like that. And literally what the response from Krauss was, well, you're just giving me anomalies. Don't give me anomalies because those aren't relevant. And it was like, well, it's a really nice hand wavium you got there, but you're not actually answering the point. You're just simply saying, well, because this breaks the pattern, it's not relevant, when the breaking of the pattern is the entire point, right? And I don't know. It just seems like it's a trend with these guys that they can't come to terms with that, which actually does definitively disprove them.
Well,
can I comment on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Bob Inyart, I used to listen to his radio show a lot. He died of COVID back in September, just for the record. But on the subject you're on now, one of the things I've noticed in my discussions with evolutionists is they believe in miracles. They just don't believe God does the miracle. They believe in mathematical miracles. And I've always been since I became dropped evolution and started studying this stuff, I became a Fred Hoyle fan. Fred Hoyle, sorry, my voice is still bad. Well, Hoyle, back at 40 years ago, he wrote an article about, it's called The Big Bang of Astronomy. And he's talking about how of the thousands of biopolymers, not one could have appeared by natural processes. And I never forget what he said. So, I forgot part of it, but basically he's talking about the ones that believe that stuff are modern mathematical miracle workers. It's just really funny. But anyway, it's called The Big Bang of Astronomy. It was a new scientist in 1981, I believe. And that's what I've noticed about these people. You can show them odds are just astronomical. They say, well, there's still a chance. Anyway, that's all I had to say. Oh, by the way, I have to leave. I have to get some sleep, but I really appreciate it. That was a great discussion. Donnie, I've been following you. I mean, I'm trying to. You're way ahead, light years ahead of me, but thanks for all your input. And John, rest of you, thanks a lot. We'll catch you later.
Appreciate you, Dan. You have a great night. Get that sleep. Keep that recovery up.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Now, the point that you just made about the dismissal of the probability problem, it just cracks me up. I mean, and as people know, I use the joke of, as you guys know, I love to do reductio ad absurdum sometimes, and it really amazes me that, in spite of the fact that this clip is from an extraordinarily famous movie and embodies characters that you definitely don't want to be compared to, they continue to do exactly this.
So you're telling me there's a chance? Yeah!
So every time.
Yeah, well, that's kind of. Sorry, I was just going to say that's kind of the whole multiverse idea, right? Like, there's not any actual, not even demonstrable evidence. There's not even any hint of a suggestion that there is any replications of our universe before us or universes outside of us or anything like that. But they fabricate these literal science fiction cartoon ideas, right? Rick and Morty is just an example of that. And that becomes their actual beliefs about the universe. Why? Not because of evidence, but because the mathematical miracle, as I can't remember the guy who just left's name, but as he had just put it, is so great that you almost have to fabricate something fanciful. And I even think that's partially something that argues in favor of the God view, because people will say, the existence of a transcendent mind is, somehow illogical, or it's crazy, or whatever, right? And to a large extent, I think that it's like, obviously I don't think it's illogical, but I do think that something ridiculously awesome has to be the reason that we're all here. And you guys even agree with that, right? Because you make up these weird views like multiversal theory and stuff like that, which, by the way, if you ever want a fun disproving of the multiverse, if there's an infinite number of multiverses, each with its varying possibilities and all that, then that means logically there has to be a multiverse in which there is no multiverses. But since the multiverse cannot exist apart from all the multiverses, that would mean that there is indeed no multiverses. And I learned that from, I can't remember his name now, but he's some logician from Harvard. But anyways, yeah, sorry.
No, it's a great
that's
point.
strong as a man's word. That's crazy.
Yeah, the amount of creativity that's necessary for the atheist worldview is reaching, like, by creativity, I mean like the sci-fi creativity, right? Is astronomical. Like, okay, so maybe you guys should stop being academics and move to Hollywood and start writing movie scripts, because I gotta give your storytelling creativity some props. Like, you guys are pretty good. Although I would say that the Evo world is now becoming very comparable to the current state of Hollywood. They can't actually come up with new explanations. They just keep doing reboots of the same concept and add-on sequels and such. Because I think their worldview hinders them from actually coming up with, sound and valid explanations. But that's just me.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. But just a quick joke. It's not really a joke. It is true, but it's kind of a joke in the sense that it's funny. Lightsabers are actually more realistic than the atheist worldview, because there are people who can potentially invent lightsabers, and they totally do doctoral research on this thing. But there is nobody who is doing any doctoral research on solutions to the problems for the Evo atheist worldview. So one day we might have lightsabers and still no evidence for evolution.
Man, lightsaber is going to be awesome. I can't wait for that. Speaking of lightsabers,
I think what you have to understand is that no matter how good of a piece of evidence that you have that you want to bring to them, in their mind, it will never be enough to outweigh the whole body of evidence that exists to disprove what you see. It's like, no matter what you have, there's still all of this other evidence that exists. It's kind of like, I don't know, nobody has the evidence, but everybody at the same time has the evidence.
No,
And
that is 100% true, right? It's like they always shift the goalposts. And I remember the Michael Shermer Kent Hovind debate. Michael Shermer said something like, "If you found a rabbit in the Cambrian, then that would disprove evolution." And literally, mere months later, Richard Dawkins comes out with some fanciful explanation as to why evolution would still be true even if you found rabbits in the Cambrian. And that's like, I mean, to be clear, the Cambrian is like before dinosaurs on the Evo timescale, right? And they're saying if you found rabbits living at that time frame, that wouldn't disprove their model. At least Dawkins was, right? Shermer was at least being somewhat honest when he said, "Yeah, that would disprove our model." But Dawkins has this whole lecture on. I mean, it's not a whole lecture. I guess it's like 5 minute long answer, but still, it's a just big, long, convoluted answer as to why actually, you see, simpleton you, that doesn't disprove anything. Rabbits existing before terrestrial animals does not disprove the evolutionary worldview. I mean, it doesn't make any sense, but it's exactly what you're saying. It's like there is nothing, for a lot of these people at least, there is nothing that could possibly convince them, because in their minds, I guess the evidence is just so overwhelming. But in reality, all that is a denial of the evidence.
Well, I think as time goes by, they will slowly become an accomplice to their own annihilation.
yeah, but it'll be too late for them, most of them anyways. But I can't understand why they can't understand that appealing to a multiverse is no different than appealing to God, because they're appealing to infinite possibilities, the multiverse, without explaining or accounting for where the energy comes from, where the matter, or basically it's just energy, where it comes from, and how does the energy get ordered in these universes. And matter, energy can't order itself. Energy can't make itself. It's got to come from a greater amount of energy, greater force. But then, if you think about it, you can't have an infinite regress of physical causes, because then you'd have, a universe filled with energy that just burns everything up. It just doesn't make any sense. At some point, you have to have a cause, or a non-contingent cause for the physical universe and the energy. But they can't figure this stuff out, And I'm from the Amazon, and I can figure that out. But they can't think, like, they can't go that far. I mean, and I talk to people all the time. It's like, where'd the energy come from? Where'd the matter come from? Matter can't make itself. Matter can't order itself. Can't direct itself, and neither can energy. It doesn't make any sense. And it's like, we're all these geniuses. We're all these geniuses that go to school, get all these PhDs and everything, can't understand a simple thing like where energy comes from. And you can't have an infinite regress of physical causes, And if you appeal to multiverses, where'd the energy come from? How did it get ordered? And you still can't, have infinite regress of physical causes anyway, even if you're appealing to multiverses, without even accounting for where the energy came from, because everything costs something. And they don't seem to care too much of what the cost is.
Well, what cracks me up about the the atheist positions and all that kind of stuff is, they're desperate. They desperately demand empirical evidence for freaking everything, right? But then when there's empirical evidence for the beginning of the universe, they say we can't just accept that as true. We need to come up with all of these hypotheticals that we can't actually empirically observe or have empirical evidence for, in order to circumvent what we can empirically measure, i.e. the universe at the beginning, right? Like, it's like, have you guys thought this one through very much? Well, hypothetically speaking, there could be multiverses. Therefore, the universe that we observe we see doesn't actually, the multiverse is eternal, or whatever the talking points I want to come up with, right? It's like, but in any other context, you demand empirical evidence, right? But now you're going to dismiss the empirical evidence. Got it. That makes a lot of sense. And then you claim that we're the ones that are taking extreme outlier positions. Interesting. Same. It also correlates with the whole like A versus B theories of time, right? And trying to use that to circumvent infinite regress and all that kind of stuff. It's like either way, you still have a starting point, even if you go with B theory, but doesn't circumvent the start problem.
Yeah, well, and on top of that, which you said is exactly right, but on top of that, I think that I get mixed up which one is A and which one is B, but the past definitely exists. The future, I guess, that's a little bit more as far as, do you believe predestination or not and stuff like that. You could argue about the future's existence, whether or not we're actively creating it, like block time or progressive block time, it's called, right? Or not. But as far as the past existing, I mean, that's, in my opinion, so easily demonstratable. I mean, I exist, therefore it logically follows that my progenitor father exists, and it logically follows that if he exists, that his progenitor exists, and so on and so forth, right? Eventually you start getting the dead guys, and you can't start making the claim that those dead guys don't exist, otherwise it wouldn't follow that that which comes from them exists, right? And the thing I always found hilarious about this is just asking people the question, do dinosaurs exist, right? And they'll always say something like they did exist, or well, they're extinct, or something like that. It's like, you notice you didn't say no. You notice that it's almost like that's illogical to you to say that dinosaurs don't exist. They don't exist anymore, right? There's like a quality there of having existed or having been on the planet. But to say that they outright don't exist just seems wrong. Why does that seem wrong? Because it is wrong, right? The fact that things in the past happened and have active impact on the future, or the fact that they have active impact on the future, is evidence that they did happen and do have real existence. So not only is it true that the theory of tenseless time doesn't help them at all, but on top of that, the theory of tenseless time, at least within the confines of the universe, just does not make any sense at all.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. And I think I may have just found a book I'm gonna have to read. It's a defense of the growing block theory. The actual title is Nothing to Come, a defense of the growing block theory of time. I may have to check that out. Let's see what they have to say. Oh, actually, maybe not.
Well, the present does exist.
Okay, who does really $89 for the freaking Kindle version of your book? Seriously? Man, scientists are ridiculous.
I actually bought I can't remember which one was the one with this number, but I have a Joel Baden book and a Richard Carrier book. One of the two of those is $143. Which is like, that's half the price of my dog.
This book is 197 pages. You want $90 for 197 pages? I mean, in a defense of your own freaking theory, like, do you not want people to actually buy it? Like, let's make our book so expensive nobody reads it, so we can't get bad reviews.
That's a good plan.
Oh man, that is crazy. And I'm gonna just go out on a limb. Okay, the other thing that really pisses me off is, why do people that publish books, like through actual publishers and stuff, like, I don't understand why audiobook versions are not just a standard move. Like, why would you not have an audiobook version of your book? I really don't understand this. It drives me up the wall.
So this is just purely speculation, but I'm gonna guess probably pricing. I don't know how much it costs to get somebody to just read your book, but usually you don't want some scrub, right? You want some like Morgan Freeman kind of character, right? And obviously not him in particular, but somebody who sounds good narrating is my point. And I imagine that's probably a little bit spendier than it should be.
Well, no, I mean, it's definitely it can be expensive, but you can get it for relatively affordable, like decent, relatively affordable these days. and it's such a huge portion of the audience now. To me, it's kind of dumb to not do that. If you're actually
I'm
wanting
more
to have,
likely to buy that than a physical book for sure, especially since an audio book sometimes I don't even have to buy it. I can just listen to it without buying it, like rent it for a night, like a Redbox movie.
yep, yeah. I mean, I've conditioned my brain so I can listen to books, and it's not. I mean, I can listen at like 2.5 speed now, and it's like, man, you can get a 13-hour book and finish it in a pretty reasonable amount of time. You know, if you at higher speeds, and I don't know, it's made the absorption of information so much easier to pull off these days. But I don't know. People just don't want to. Well, we're also talking about academics, so they don't necessarily all that up to date with, you know, modern marketing techniques and things of that nature. But anyway, yeah, audible.com, man. I love that thing. And also, like, libraries are now. Libby is a great app for getting audiobooks from the library. It's freaking awesome.
So
Yeah, I'm actually
I still
my
have
go ahead.
my notes that I took from the debate. So if you guys want, we can actually entertain some of these things that he said in his opening statement. I have one of them that I'm pretty confused on. I'd like LPP or the synagogue, your input. Y'all are really smart. Donnie, you're always going out for coffee or trying to get those kids in control or something, but I'd love your input also. He said that comparative anatomy mathematically proves common ancestry. And then he like went through this little chart. We had colorful dots everywhere, and I'm not sure what he was even trying to say. So can you guys help me out on that?
Well,
Say it
so
again? No, go ahead, CJ.
well, what I was going to say is that I think, first off, I would want to know what he means by mathematically, because I imagine he's probably referring to somebody who has looked at the odds, and the odds are probably something that are key to his argument, as far as that you have thus and such a number out of 1,000 or 1,000,000 or whatever kind of chance of getting these different variations by chance and stuff like that, or lack of variations by chance, excuse me. But the point that I would kind of make first off is that I want to know how they would get those numbers, because you don't really have something to compare it to, right? So, like, as an example, you have canine teeth on all carnivores, but also canine teeth on fruit bats and pandas and stuff like that, right? Or us, who are not herbivores, but we are omnivorous. And you can say, like, oh, well, the canine teeth is evidence of common ancestry because they're all similar, right? And the fact that they're similar is somehow demonstrating that it's common or something like that. But I don't think that it's not like you have a comparison of, like, okay, how likely is it for animals that are not related to have canine teeth? Because you're claiming they're all related, right? So, like, when you go back to, this is actually something I experienced with SWE in the live chat when we were talking about ear bones. Snake made the comment that the Pakicetus has a ear bone which is only found in whales, and that therefore these were animals were related, that demonstrated somehow common ancestry. And I, in pure ignorance, made a comment in the live chat that just doesn't sound right to me. It sounds like that's a really small area of the anatomy to start saying, oh, these are definitively related. And SWE brought up that humans apparently have a identical ear bone to that of lizards or some other reptile. It might have just been reptiles in general, but the point is reptiles, right? And so, it was one of those things where I didn't know that before. I appreciate her actually revealing that information to me, but that is exactly the point. You can't conclude that the same infraorder of animal exists from Pakicetus to blue whale on the basis of an ear bone when we have an equally similar or identical ear bone from two species in completely different classes, right? Not only am I not the same species as a lizard, not only am I not the same genus or family as a lizard, but I'm a mammal and the lizard is not, right? And so if we are going to argue that this ear bone from the Pakicetus makes it direct, is proof that it's got direct lineage to the blue whale, it seems like we have a very big problem. Well, lo and behold, the actual response she gives back is, well, we are derived from reptiles if you go far enough back. And then that gets me back to the original point. So it's like, okay, then what are you getting these odds from? Because if you're just going to fall back on everything's related, even when we can definitively prove that there's no special relation or something like that, bubblegum gun has caught me. I am in fact a lizard person. It's that Jewish blood in me. I just, unfortunately can't help but being lizardy. Anyways, if you're just going to go back and claim, well, they're all actually related if you go far enough back anyway, then you don't have anything to compare it to and say, hey, see, this is the statistical likelihood that two unrelated creatures would have the same portion of their anatomy. Because in the end, you're claiming we're all related. So yeah, if a raccoon has hands and a chimpanzee has hands, you can't actually demonstrate I'm any closer to the chimpanzee than the raccoon on that basis. Because eventually, if I go far enough back, you're saying I'm related to both of them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I hear this thing about comparative anatomy all the time, and they try to say it's mathematical proven. But if you think about it, every single change in anatomy requires information to make that change. And of course, it's not just morphology, it's an entire the difference between a reptile and a mammal is just a totally different, different set of information, completely different, different kind of animal, which requires totally different information, which you can't get by making mistakes. So this mathematical nonsense they're talking about is just, makes no sense to me, because you can't get any information that's not there, much less all the information to go from one thing to another thing to another thing to another thing. You need, vast amounts, billions of, changes by making mistakes, which is total nonsense to me. To me, people that believe in evolution, they have a mental problem. I mean, I don't have no patience for people, like that.
Well, before Donnie starts talking here, to me, in line with your point on the information change, right? Like, if we know that usually somewhere between 3 and 15 modifications to a protein sequence, right? They become thermodynamically unstable. 3 to 15, right? And it's like, well, there's only 27 differences. It's like, okay, so let's assume it could absorb 15 of the changes. How do you get the other 12 without having collapse? I mean, seriously, like, we observe this in real time. So you guys claim that, they can just make it through all these major changes and it's not that big a deal. Like, well, we have empirical evidence that says otherwise. So you're making a hell of a lot of assumptions in inferences that your hypothetical is correct. I'm just saying. Go ahead, Donnie.
No, all good points. The Indo-Hyas example, from Indo-Hyas to Pakicetus to Ambulocetus, Myocetus, Rhodocetus, eventually Basilosaurus and blue whale, like CJ was talking about. It's another case of, for one, storytelling, artistic licensing, and circular reasoning. Because here, it was interesting because Indo-Hyas, this specific expert, he said until now the involucrum, right? This is what we're talking about with the ear bone, out of the inner wall of its ear bone, that they're trying to say is evidence that this is like an early form of a whale, of a walking whale. He said, until now, the involucrum was the only character occurring in all fossil and recent cetaceans, but in no other mammals. Identification of this feature in Indohyus calls into question what it is to be a cetacean. It requires either that the concept of cetacea be expanded to include Indohyus, or that the involucrum cease to characterize cetaceans. And of course, the authors, they argued for the latter because they've got the bias in terms of the whale evolutionary story, right? But to me, this is just a classic case of circularity, where their circle gets bigger and bigger and bigger in terms of which creatures they're adding in based on these features. In other words, the involucrum is diagnostic of cetaceans, except when it isn't. And so I like this part here. Why not just call them what they were? Amphibious mammals that spent part of their lives on land and part of their lives in the water. Like when it comes to Ambulocetus, it's interesting. I have a slide here. So here's another expert, Dr. Gendrich from the University of Michigan, has noticed a very crocodile-like feature of Ambulocetus and now doubts its inclusion into the whale lineage. The point is, we see creatures today that, if they were found in the fossil record, could be interpreted as some early ancestors of whales. I mean, we have the same type of creatures today that live partly on the water, partly in the water, partly on land. The otter comes to mind, or like a walrus, or even a crocodile. And then that's exactly what we see with these creatures as well. So I see these evolutionists constantly bringing up the whale evolutionary series as some perfect transition when I think there's so many discrepancies at play there.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. I don't know. At this point, I mean, something I've been contemplating lately is just making you doing a slight paradigm shift, at least for myself, right? And basically going to, here's where we are, ladies and gentlemen. We have two fundamentally different worldviews, and there's just no way around it. Like, here's where we're at. This is the case, and let's present our arguments, and you guys decide which one you think is less nuts. Because here's where we're at, and just go into full scale, no ifs, ands, buts about it, reductio ad absurdum, and either it's this and like explain all the illogic, or this. It's this or this. Just go for it, full scale, no holds barred. Because I don't know. We're obviously not going to ever. I don't think we're going to convince 99% of the hardcore Evos. It's just not going to happen. They're not going to see reason. It's now down to the fence sitters and not holding back and going for the jugular, if you will.
Well, and to an extent, I definitely agree with that. I mean, obviously, I'm sure somewhere there'll be some debater who comes to another conclusion, right, and is convinced. But I think for the most part, convincing your opposition is just completely futile. Really, you're talking to the audience, and hopefully the audience is there trying to actually get more information and be on an honest pursuit of truth. And then at that point, you actually have the ability to speak to them, right? Because the other guy, usually the reason he's there is because he's, if not firmly convinced of his position, at least is, sorry, the dog's getting loud. At least convinced to such an extent that he wants to defend it, right? But usually it's even greater than that. Convinced to such an extent that, it's like core belief. I really can give for myself. I'm not going to debate, for example, what is a good example actually? The new chronology. That's good. That's a great example. David Roll's new chronology, right? I'm not going to debate that new chronology because it's not something that I'm 100% convinced on, right? Whereas I will debate early date of the Exodus, because that's just plainly what the Bible teaches, and I think that history can demonstrate. And I would imagine for most of these guys, it's probably the same. Snake, I don't think, would be here if he wasn't, gung ho with the idea of evolution being a thing. But everybody who's following Snake, that might be different, right? They might actually be interested in some honest pursuit of truth. And I think the same probably goes, even though we probably don't like to admit it, the same probably goes for a lot of our, more preferred debaters as well, right? Like I'm certainly not teetering on the fence of agnosticism, right? I very firmly believe not only that I'm right that there's a God, but that I'm right that his name is Jesus. You know what I mean? But nonetheless, the point there is just to say, with that in mind, it definitely makes more sense to, approach it in such a way that you're going for the audience, right? That you're kind of going for the jugular, as you say, right? Where it's like, I'm not interested in how the opposing guy feels about me. It'd be nice if we could get along, but that's not really the point. The point is to convince you guys who are here to listen to the debate, because he's made up his mind.
Right. Well, I agree with your point, and I think that this is okay. So two things. So I agree that you're not going to necessarily convince them, and vice versa, right? I would say that a significant differentiation point between, again, this does not apply to all, but to a significant percentage of the Evos, right, or the atheists, per their own admission, they don't understand half of their own talking points, right? And to the point you're making, CJ, like, you don't want to go debate something unless you have at least a modicum of understanding, right? Not just oh, I don't even know what the hell you're talking about, but you're wrong, right?
Right.
How often do we hear that from the atheists? Like, they're in a debate. It's like, I don't know how this thinks, but I know that you're wrong. I hear that all the time. And, well, the experts say, and it's like, you don't even understand what the experts are saying. So how do you know that they're right and that you should accept their position when, per your own admission, you don't know what they're saying? I would, just from a pure like sense of non-self embarrassment, I'm not going to come out and be like, I am an idiot who doesn't know what the hell I'm talking about. I accepted a debate on a topic that I don't know. I don't understand. Like, why would you do that? That's just dumb. But they do it all the time, right? And
they do it all the time, yeah.
And what amazes me is they also issue the talking point that we don't understand the points, right? And this is why I use my atheist fantasyland projection complex, joke all the time, because it's like, dude, you just admitted you don't know what you're talking about, but you're also saying that I don't know what I'm talking about. But you just admitted you don't know what I just said. So how do you know that I don't know what I said when you just admitted you don't understand what I said? And like, why would you? I can't imagine doing that publicly either.
Yeah, no kidding. It's like, well, you know what my personal favorite is, because it sounds sophisticated, but really, if you look beyond the bluster, it's just exactly what you're talking about, which is that's not my area of expertise. It's like, then what do we? If you are not going to talk on something that's not your area, why are we here right now? Like, what are we talking about? Give me somebody whose area of expertise this actually is, because clearly I'm not going to get anywhere with you. You know what I mean? And that one drives me up a wall, if I'm being honest with you, because I really don't understand what your goal in joining a debate is, for the sole purpose of saying that's not my. I'll give an example of this that has impacted me personally, in the sense that I debated this person, Dr. Josh Bowen, who, for the record, I just want to state, I do have a pretty high level of respect for Dr. Josh, in the sense that he's got a lot of brain power up there, for certain, and he's definitely done a lot of research. I mean, he's teaching a class on how to read the cuneiform, or whatever it is that they call it. I think it's called cuneiform, but the Assyrian alphabet, right? So the guy's no scrub. But me and Jonathan Sheffield debated him and a woman named Maggie Bryson, I believe, on the Exodus, and whether or not it had actually happened. And I mean, gosh, it must have been 14, 15 times. he turns around to her because she's the Egyptologist and says, well, that's not my area. I'll give it to her. And it's like, okay, respectfully, my friend, why are you here? You know what I mean? Like, if you're not going to answer the questions, then just, I mean, we can make this a one-on-one and either me and John will debate Maggie, but I don't understand what your reason for being here is if you don't have confidence in what you believe on the issue. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, well, it's a defense mechanism, and they try to use it to like circumvent Dunning-Kruger accusations or to substantiate them on the flip side, right? And I don't know. To me, in the modern era in which we live, it's not that difficult if you have enough IQ points to go and at least gain a reasonable understanding of a topic without that much effort. Like you can do this. So to your point on the I'm not an expert in, usually that's in response to pretty surface level points too, like not necessarily getting way down in the weeds either. That's what always cracks me up. It's how superficial it is. That just substantiates my point that the vast majority of these individuals who have dogmatic worldviews have either willfully not substantiated the fundamentals of their position because of, and I think that for those people that do that, I think a huge portion of them don't because they subconsciously know that their worldview would be obliterated if they actually ever did go and do an actual investigation. Because think about this, like how many times have any of all of us like posted links for somebody who's talking trash, whether in a debate, side chat, whatever. And when they've, insisted XYZ is false, you're making it up, yada, yada. And it's like, well, here's the link. And they're like, I'm not going to waste my time clicking that link. You're like, so you just claimed I have nothing to support my position. I provided a link. And then now you're not even going to click the link to find out whether I'm right or you're right. Really? That just proves beyond all doubt that you have no confidence in your own position. And if you click that link, you're going to have no excuse for your own stupidity and ignorance. And I think that's an unavoidable reality of where a lot of them are at. And I think also some of that stems from because they won't do it, they tell themselves that we won't do it either, right? Like case in point, earlier tonight, I was Googling stuff in regards to the points Donnie was making in relation to Dr. Danny Boy and on histones and such. It's like, yeah, I'm going to go find out whether that's can be easily debunked or not. It took me no time at all to prove it. Atheists on the flip side would be like, no, that's waste too much time for me to go look that up. So you're wrong.
Yeah, no kidding. And that's actually had an experience with that same thing tonight in that, talking to this stupid horror energy, whatever her actual name is and whatever her actual motivations are, nobody really knows, right? But the fact of the matter is the conversations are infuriating because, it was that I've already talked about it twice now, so I'll just be quick, but it was that whole thing with the whale, right? And it was like, you're using this whale bone, this ear bone, as an argument that these two creatures are specially related and in the same infraorder. And then you're giving me an example of two species that are not specially related, are not in the same genera as each other, are not even in the same class as each other. And, it's not exactly the same in the sense that at least she's trying to argue. And I'll give credit where credit's due there, but it is exactly the same in the sense that it's like you're not dealing with what's being presented. Because then after that, we started arguing about, she starts bringing up, okay, well, we're all eukaryotes, and it's like, okay, even if I agreed with you completely about evolution and deep time and all that kind of stuff, a eukaryote is not the same thing as far as categories as a species or a genera or a reptile, right? And what I mean by that is to say that, if I'm a reptile versus being a mammal or a mammal versus being an amphibian, all three of those things are eukaryotes. All three of those things are vertebrates. All three of those things she actually used the word, I'm not really familiar with it, but deuterosomes or something like that, but basically kind of crass, but our anus forms in the embryo before our mouth, which I guess is a way of categorizing animals. I was today years old when I learned that, but regardless, those categories are incredibly broad, are not actually based in biology, but are based on somewhat similar characteristics, and are not even close to the same as trying to prove special relation. And it's we've kind of hit three versions of that so far tonight. There's the don't give me anomalies thing, and then there's the one we're talking about right now. Well, that's not my area of expertise. And it's all the same tactic of let's deflect from that real quick. They call it a red herring in philosophy, and move on to something else.
Right, that's what it is. It's just a red herring. They talk about all this little detail, that little detail. They're not even looking at the whole picture.
Raising doubts. That is Satan's game right there, and that's why his spirit is currently living inside of these Evos.
Because they
They just look like the guy that they serve. That's all.
can't argue the point, so they'll just look for some kind of obscure detail somewhere. And SWE does that all the time. She says, "Well, what about this little thing and that little thing? And what about the information that can't write itself?" I mean, come on. It's not complicated. These people make it so complicated. It's not that complicated.
Yeah, and the thing is too what makes it even worse is the fact that nobody calls them out. I have supreme confidence that if I just did the refutation of IP yesterday, and we'll do another one next week, by the way. A little shameless plug for me and SFT. But regardless, over on SFT's channel, we're talking about some of the stuff with IP, right? I am 1,000% confident that if I got a debate with IP and just completely crapped the bed, that John would be John Maddox right next to me, right? Would be the first person to tell me, or Donnie, or Jamie Russell, or Kent Hovind, or any none of those guys. They'd all be like, okay, well, I don't agree with that. That doesn't seem like it makes a whole lot of sense. All that kind of stuff, right? But when it happens on the other side, when Gutsick Gibbon has an entire compilation put together of that's not my area of expertise, right? Then the video is like 15 minutes long. I don't know how long exactly it is, but SFT would know what I'm talking about because it's his video. Nobody's got anything to say about it, right? And that to me is almost worse because it's what it demonstrates is that the entire community of Evo atheists is unwilling to deal with the matters. It's not just a couple. It's not like we have our fringe, fundamentalists, as people would say, which I don't think that's a bad word, but just to use their terminology. It's not anything like that. Rather, it's actually, this is like a systemic problem all throughout the group. And that to me is just, I almost think that's even a worse problem.
Yeah, I mean, you got the crying atheist that none of them want anything to do with, and they won't even call him out on his loss. So they're not really true friends.
Yeah, and the only time they do call each other out is when somebody says something bad about Islam or something like that, right? Like, well, that's not very woke of you, so we'll attack you for that. But actually misrepresenting our position or representing it in a poor way, no, we ain't got nothing to say about that.
All right, guys. I am exhausted. It's time to call it a night. We're at 2 hours and 15 minutes. It's 1:43 a.m. my time. Let's do last words and call it an evening. Chris, you got anything you want to say? Oh, by the way, before you say anything, I want to congratulate you on the debate. Good performance, and say thanks for taking the time to do that as well, and for joining us for the after show.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Coming from you, that's a lot because you're really pretty intelligent, LPP. I wish I could lay some stuff down on the brothers that you're laying down on a daily basis. Like whenever you do these live streams, CJ mentioned your huge vocabulary, which is awesome. So I really appreciate that. And thanks for having me on. I'll see you next time.
I appreciate that very much. Yeah, you're welcome anytime. And yeah, the vocabulary stems from growing up. I had to do vocabulary tests every freaking week. Oh man. You'd write the freaking definitions out every time, spell the word correctly. Ugh, it was epic. But I look back on it now and like I'm glad I did it. But growing up, I did not enjoy that very much, but went well. Jungle, you got any last words before we wrap up?
Yeah. My latest video, I put out an offer there as to the the geology, why we have the geology we have today, and that's my latest video. And I thought I did a halfway decent job at that. And maybe if somebody wants to check it out, maybe they could leave some comments and make some criticisms or suggestions if they have any more evidence, or anything like that. But other than that, take care, everybody. Yeah.
Appreciate you. Everybody go check that out. And Answers in Atheism his group will probably be searching through the transcript of this conversation. So, Speed, if you are reading this right now, why don't you go debunk Jungle's video? You guys have a weather report on that one. Okay, CJ, last words.
Yeah, just say thank you again for having me. It's been a long time since I've been on this channel, actually. So, obviously, not that has anything to do with anything you've done, right? I just don't tend to show up as much because of job stuff. But regardless, appreciate the open rooms. And I'll just kind of do a little shameless plug for me and SFT next week, Monday night, Lord willing, of course. We'll be doing another one of those, part 2, talking about IP and his arguments as to why the Bible doesn't teach a young earth. So that'll be fun, hopefully. And yeah, it's a good conversation. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, yeah, everybody, make sure to check that out. Go over to SFT's channel, set the notification reminder so you don't miss that conversation. And everybody, I want to thank you guys so much for sticking out with us into the wee hours. For those of you who are on the other side of the pond or down under, thanks so much for spending time with us as well, and hope everybody has a great evening or a great day. We have an awesome rest of the week, and just be productive. And as I always say at the end of these things, as we're contemplating different aspects of our existence, the fundamental necessities for all the things that we take for granted on a daily basis and are ultimately at the root of our very existence and need to stop just being dismissed out of hand, make sure that whatever conclusion you reach is logical, plausible, and probable. Have a good night, everybody.